September 1944. The morning sun blazed over the Nebraska plains, turning the endless fields into a shimmering sea of gold and fire. Inside the back of a rattling army truck, Fritz Keller sat handcuffed, his face pressed to a dusty slit in the canvas, watching America pass by like a dream. Cornfields stretching to the horizon, windmills spinning lazily, white farmhouses standing like silent sentinels against the vast sky. To Fritz, a German prisoner of war, this peaceful land felt more foreign than any battlefield he had known. The truck groaned along a gravel road, past barns weathered to the color of dried earth, past towering silos that reached like church steeples toward heaven. The other prisoners sat in silence, their faces blank, their eyes distant. They had surrendered weeks earlier in France, and now they were laborers, farmhands, ghosts in enemy territory. Then, a voice cut through the engine's roar. "Listen up!" the guard, Corporal Ryan Brooks from Chicago, shouted. "You are here to work, not to cause trouble. Keep your heads down, eat your food, act stupid, and return in chains. Understood?" No one answered. No one had to. The truck slowed, turned down a narrow lane, and stopped before a tall red barn. Chickens scattered. A dog barked furiously from the porch of a white farmhouse with green shutters. And then a man stepped out of the barn, tall, broad-shouldered, his temples streaked with gray. He wore faded overalls and a sweat-stained work shirt. His blue eyes were calm, the kind that had seen too many hard seasons to be surprised by much. He nodded at Ryan, then turned to the prisoners. "Mornin', boys," he said in clear English. "Name's Henry Mueller. This is my place." Fritz froze. Mueller. Behind him, another prisoner, Otto Braun, sucked in a sharp breath. "Mueller," Otto whispered in German. "An American farmer named Mueller." Fritz's pulse quickened. "It's a common name," he muttered back. "Could mean nothing." But then Henry did something that stopped every man in his tracks. He switched to German. "We start at North Field," he said, his accent soft but unmistakable. "The corn has to come in before the storm." Fritz blinked. The farmer sounded like someone's uncle in Bavaria. Ryan frowned. "You speak German, Mr. Mueller?" Henry didn't flinch. "My folks came from over there," he said, slipping back into English. "A lot of us around here did." Fritz and the others exchanged glances. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world where names mean more than borders, drop a comment below and tell me where you're from. And if this story already sounds impossible, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about World War II. The work was brutal. They hauled sacks of grain, stacked wooden crates, and cut rows of corn under a sun that burned with indifference to the flag they once saluted. Sweat soaked through Fritz's prison uniform. His hands blistered, but no one complained. It was honest labor, and after months of war, honest labor felt almost sacred. At midday, a woman emerged from the farmhouse, carrying a tray. Her eyes were tired, her posture firm, a small cross hanging at her neck. Behind her, a teenage girl, Lauren, and a younger boy clutching a worn baseball glove, Jake. The boy stared at the prisoners as if they might sprout horns. Henry clapped his hands. "Everybody takes 5, he said. "You too, Keller." Fritz hesitated. This had to be a trick, but Ryan nodded. "Go on, eat. Just stay where I can see you." They sat on overturned crates near the barn. The woman, Linda, Henry's wife, handed out sandwiches, even to the Germans. Jake watched from behind his sister, curiosity battling fear. Fritz took a sandwich, and Linda's gaze lingered on his face. "You're Keller?" she asked carefully. He nodded. Yes, Friedrich Keller." Something flickered in her expression. "Huh?" she murmured. Same as Henry's grandmother. Fritz frowned. Your grandmother? From across the yard, Henry called out. My grandma's name was Marta Keller before she married. Came over from the old country. He wiped sweat from his forehead. Guess the name followed us both ways across the ocean. Huh? The prisoners fell silent. Mueller Keller. Fluent German. It felt less like coincidence and more like some cosmic joke. Fritz bit into the sandwich. Ham, cheese, fresh bread, and tried to make sense of it. This man, this American farmer, carried the same names as the villages Fritz had left behind, spoke the same language his mother once sang in. But Henry wore no swastika, no uniform, no hatred in his eyes, just dirt under his nails and the weight of a harvest that wouldn't wait for anyone's war to army. Later, while hauling crates into the barn, Fritz noticed something strange. A small wooden door, half hidden behind hay bales, cracked open just an inch. A faint glow leaked through. Something metallic glinted in the dim light. His breath caught. Back at camp, there had been whispers, rumors that some German-American farmers were sympathizers, secretly sending information back to the Reich. Radio signals, code words, loyalty to the fatherland disguised as loyalty to Uncle Sam. Most prisoners dismissed it as fantasy. Now, Fritz wasn't so sure. He glanced back. Ryan and Henry were deep in conversation near the tractor. No one was watching. Fritz nudged the door with his boot. It swung open. Inside was a narrow room lined with old crates and dusty shelves. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows. On one shelf sat an object covered with a cloth, wires, knobs. His heart pounded. He stepped inside. The cloth came away easily. It wasn't just any radio. It was a heavy shortwave set, the kind that could reach across oceans, the kind that could send messages to Berlin or receive them. Beside it lay a stack of envelopes tied with string. The top one was addressed in sharp blue ink. Asterisk, asterisk, Lucas Mueller, Appleton, Wisconsin, asterisk, asterisk. Fritz heard footsteps outside. He scrambled to cover the radio and stepped out just as Henry appeared in the doorway, brow furrowed. You lost? The farmer asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes were razor sharp. Fritz swallowed. I was looking for the water pump. Henry held his stare for a beat too long. Then, to Fritz's surprise, the farmer stepped aside and lowered his voice. Best not to poke around in rooms that aren't yours, he said quietly. Out here, folks make assumptions fast about you. About me? The message was clear. Stay in your lane. Fritz nodded and walked away, pulse racing. But the question burned in his mind like a fuse on dynamite. Was Henry Mueller a traitor hiding in plain sight? Or was something else happening on this impossible farm? That night, the sky turned black. Wind rattled the windows of the barracks at Camp Atlanta, the POW facility outside Lincoln. Fritz lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day in his mind, the shared names, the fluent German, the hidden radio, the letters. He thought of his father back in Stuttgart, the man who used to talk about a cousin who had gone to America long before Hitler, a cousin named Johann Keller, who was never heard from again. What if Henry's grandmother, Marta Keller, was connected to that same branch of the family tree? What if Fritz had spent the day working on land his own blood had plowed decades before the war? The thought made his chest tighten. Outside, a lone coyote howled. Rain began to hammer the roof. Fritz closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. The next morning, Ryan announced they'd be returning to the Mueller farm. Storm didn't finish the job, he said, loading the prisoners into the truck. Corn still standing. Farmer needs help before it rots. Fritz climbed in, heart pounding. He had to know what that radio was for. When they arrived, the farm looked different, quieter. The dog didn't bark. The chickens stayed in the coop. Henry stood by the barn, arms crossed, jaw tight. 2 army jeeps were parked near the farmhouse. 3 men in dark suits stood on the porch, hats clutched in their hands like they didn't belong on dirt. FBI. Ryan's voice dropped to a whisper. Keep your mouths shut, Keller. This is above your pay grade. The agents moved inside the farmhouse. Through the window, Fritz caught flashes of movement drawers opening, papers rustling, voices rising. Linda hovered near the kitchen, pale as chalk. Lauren and Jake watched from the porch steps, wide-eyed and silent. Fritz's stomach turned. This was it. They'd found the radio. Henry was about to be arrested, and Fritz, who'd seen it first, might be dragged into the mess. Minutes stretched into an hour. Finally, the door opened. An agent stepped out, carrying the shortwave radio. A second agent followed with the stack of letters. Henry walked behind them, face unreadable. One of the agents called out to Ryan, "We're done here. Farmers clear." "Clear." Fritz stared, stunned. Henry, the German-named farmer with the hidden radio, the secret letters, the family Bible written in old German script, was cleared. The jeeps drove off, dust trailing behind them like ghosts. Henry turned toward the barn and jerked his head. "Break's over," he said gruffly. "We've still got work to do before dark." But his voice was different now, tighter, strained. Later, while the others stacked crates, Henry stepped close to Fritz, close enough that Ryan couldn't hear. "You saw that radio," Henry said quietly. "I know you did." Fritz held his breath. Henry's voice dropped even lower. "Your people aren't the only ones with family on the wrong side of the ocean, Keller." Fritz's pulse hammered in his ears. "Those letters," Henry continued, "they weren't going to Berlin. They were going to Appleton, then to New York, then neutral ships, trying to get word to folks trapped in the mess your Führer made." Fritz's head spun. "So you are German?" he whispered. Henry's jaw clenched. "I'm American," he said firmly. "And my name is still Mueller, no matter what anyone thinks." He hesitated, then added, "My grandma swore this land would be where our family stopped running from wars. Guess that didn't quite work out." He paused, eyes hard but not unkind. "Your last name's in her Bible. Keller's who left Germany before the Kaiser. Maybe your family, maybe not. That's for God to figure out." He leaned closer. "But out here, you work my fields. I feed you, and we all keep breathing. Understood?" Fritz nodded slowly, mind reeling. The suspicious farmer wasn't sending secrets to Germany. He was trying to save lives, families separated by war, letters smuggled through neutral countries, a shortwave radio used, not for espionage but for hope. Henry Mueller wasn't a traitor. He was a bridge. That afternoon, Lauren brought out more lemonade. She moved quietly, eyes darting between her father and the prisoners, like she was watching a play she didn't fully understand. When she handed Fritz a glass, their eyes met. She knew something. Later, while Fritz was washing his hands at the water pump, Lauren appeared beside him. She glanced around quickly, then slipped something into his pocket. "Don't let anyone see that," she whispered. Before he could respond, she was gone. Fritz waited until he was back in the truck, hidden among the other prisoners, before pulling out what she'd given him. It was a folded scrap torn from an old church bulletin. Inside, in careful English, someone had written, asterisk, asterisk. "After the war, if you live, someone named Keller might come looking for you. Appleton, Wisconsin. Ask for the Muellers at the Lutheran Church." Asterisk, asterisk. There was no signature, just a small cross drawn at the bottom. Fritz stared at the note until his vision blurred. Appleton, Wisconsin. A church, a family Bible with the name Keller in it. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it deep into his pocket, where the guards wouldn't find it during inspection. The truck pulled away from the farm, rattling down the gravel road. Fritz looked back through the canvas slits. Henry stood on the porch, one hand raised in a silent farewell. Linda and the kids watched from the doorway. The dog finally barked. Fritz turned away, heart aching with a confusion he couldn't name. This was supposed to be the enemy's country, a land of strangers with strange ways and strange loyalties. But here, in the middle of Nebraska, the farmers had German names. They spoke his language. They might share his blood. And they were under investigation from their own government, yet still feeding POWs bread and lemonade. Under a sky that looked no different from the one back home. Somewhere beyond the fields and fences, Appleton waited. A church, a family, answers. Fritz wasn't sure he was ready to find them, but the question haunted him like a ghost. If this was the enemy's country, why did standing in that farmyard feel more like home than the uniform on his back? 3 weeks passed. The seasons changed fast in Nebraska. September gave way to October. The air turned sharp. Leaves fell like copper coins from the trees lining the farm roads. Fritz and the other prisoners returned to the Mueller farm twice more. Each time, the work was the same: hauling corn, stacking bales, fixing fence posts before winter came. But something had shifted. Henry was quieter now. He still spoke German when giving instructions, but there was a weight to his words, a sadness that hadn't been there before. Linda stopped bringing lemonade to the fields. Lauren and Jake no longer watched from the porch. The FBI visit had left scars no one talked about. On what would be their final day at the farm, the sky was gray and heavy with the promise of snow. The prisoners worked in silence, breath visible in the cold air. Ryan stamped his feet to stay warm, rifle slung over his shoulder. "Last run, fellas," he said. "Farm's closing up for the season. You'll be rotated to a factory job next week." Fritz's heart sank. He wouldn't see this place again. Wouldn't see Henry or the farmhouse with the green shutters or the barn where secrets had been kept and then forgiven. At midday, Henry called for a break. This time, it was just him and a thermos of coffee. No Linda, no kids. He poured cups for Ryan and the guards first, then handed one to Fritz. "Drink up," Henry said. "It's going to get colder." Fritz wrapped his hands around the cup, grateful for the warmth. Henry stood beside him, staring out at the fields they'd worked together. "You ever think about what comes after?" Henry asked quietly. Fritz frowned. After the war?" Henry nodded. "When it's all over, when the guns stop, and the dead are counted, and the world tries to pretend it didn't tear itself apart." Fritz didn't answer. Henry took a sip of coffee. "My grandma used to say that wars don't end when the treaties are signed. They end when the last man who remembers stops telling the story." He turned to face Fritz. "You're going to live through this, Keller. I can see it. You're smart. You keep your head down. And when it's over, you're going to go home." Fritz swallowed hard. If there's a home to go back to. Henry nodded slowly. "Yeah, if." He paused, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It showed a young woman in a dark dress standing in front of a farmhouse that looked nothing like the one behind them now. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes were serious. On the back, written in faded ink, was a name. Asterisk, asterisk, Marta Keller, Stuttgart, 1889, asterisk, asterisk. Fritz's breath caught. "That's her," Henry said. "My grandma. She left Germany with nothing but a suitcase and a Bible. Came to America because she believed there had to be a place where people didn't kill each other over borders." He handed the photograph to Fritz. "I want you to have this. Fritz stared at the image, hands trembling. I can't. You can, Henry said firmly. Because one day, when someone asks you what America was like during the war, I want you to remember this. Not the camps, not the guards, not the barbed wire. He gestured toward the fields. I want you to remember that a farmer named Mueller fed a prisoner named Keller, and that names don't mean a damn thing when the work needs doing. Fritz looked up, tears burning his eyes. Henry's voice softened. Maybe we're family, maybe we're not. But out here, we shared bread, and that's enough. Before Fritz could respond, Ryan called out, All right, break's over. Let's finish this up. Henry clapped Fritz on the shoulder once, then walked back toward the barn. Fritz slipped the photograph into his pocket next to the note Lauren had given him. 2 pieces of paper, 2 threads connecting him to a country that wasn't supposed to feel like anything but enemy soil. The work resumed. They hauled the last of the corn, stacked the final crates, and tied down tarps over equipment that wouldn't be used until spring. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields, Henry stood by the barn and watched them load into the truck. Ryan counted heads, checked his clipboard, and gave the signal to go. The engine rumbled to life. Fritz sat in the back, watching through the canvas slits as the farm grew smaller and smaller. Henry raised one hand. Not a wave, just a hand lifted in acknowledgement. A goodbye without words. And then the farm disappeared behind a hill, and all Fritz could see was the gray Nebraska sky. That night, back at the camp, Fritz lay in his bunk and pulled out the photograph. Marta Keller, Stuttgart, 1,889. She looked like his aunt, or maybe his grandmother, or maybe just another woman who had decided that staying meant dying, and leaving meant living. He thought about Henry's words. Wars don't end when the treaties are signed. They end when the last man who remembers stops telling the story. Fritz folded the photograph carefully and tucked it back into his pocket. Somewhere in Wisconsin, a church waited. A family named Mueller, a Bible with his name in it. And when the war ended, if he survived, he would go there. Not as a prisoner, not as a soldier, just as a man trying to understand how a name could cross an ocean and still mean home. May 8th, 1945, VE Day. Victory in Europe. The war was over. Fritz Keller sat in a processing camp in France, waiting for repatriation. Around him, thousands of German POWs waited too. Some in silence, some in tears, some in hollow-eyed disbelief. Germany had fallen. The cities were rubble. The armies scattered. The Führer dead in a bunker beneath Berlin. Fritz didn't know if his father was alive. Didn't know if his home still stood. Didn't know what he was going back to. But he had 2 pieces of paper in his pocket. A photograph of a woman named Marta Keller and a note with an address in Appleton, Wisconsin. The journey home took months. He was processed, interviewed, cleared, and finally released. He traveled by rail through the remains of what had once been Germany, Frankfurt, Stuttgart, small towns with missing signposts. When he finally reached Stuttgart, his father's house was gone. Not damaged, gone. Only a crater with weeds and broken bricks. A neighbor told him his father had died during a bombardment 2 years earlier. No grave, no marker, just absence. Fritz stood in the ruins of his childhood and felt nothing. The conflict had taken everything except the photograph and the note. It took another year before he could leave Germany paperwork, visas, and support from international organizations helping displaced people rebuild their lives. But finally, in the spring of 1947, Friedrich Keller boarded a ship bound for New York. He carried 1 suitcase, a few American dollars earned from odd jobs, and the same two pieces of paper he'd kept since 1944. When the Statue of Liberty came into view, Fritz felt something shift inside him. Not joy, not relief, just the fragile hope that somewhere his name might still carry meaning beyond his past. From New York, he took a bus to Wisconsin. The landscape rolled past green hills, calm towns, farmland stretching into the distance. It reminded him of Nebraska. Appleton was small and orderly. Church steeples rose above Main Street like Kayet landmarks. Fritz walked into a Lutheran church on a Wednesday afternoon. An older woman sat in the front pew, polishing candlesticks. She looked up when he entered, surprise crossing her face. "Can I help you?" she asked. Fritz pulled out the note, hands shaking. "I'm looking for someone named Mueller," he said cautiously. "I was told they might know about a family named Keller." The woman's eyes widened. She stood slowly, setting down the cloth. "Wait here," she said, before disappearing into a back room. Minutes passed. Then a man emerged. He was younger than Henry had been, lean with dark hair and sharp eyes, but the lines of his face were familiar. "I'm Lucas Mueller," he said. "Henry was my uncle." Fritz's heart froze. "Was." Lucas nodded gently. "He passed last winter." His heart gave out while he was repairing a fence. Fritz felt the room sway. Lucas motioned to a pew. "Sit, please." They sat in the quiet church, sunlight drifting through stained glass. "My uncle wrote to me about you," Lucas said. "Said he met someone named Keller years ago. Said he thought you might come one day." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "He left this for you." Fritz took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter written in Henry's careful handwriting. Asterisk, asterisk, Keller. "If you're reading this, it means you made it through. I'm grateful I never told you everything directly. My grandmother, Marta, left Germany during a time when her family was forced into a conflict she didn't believe in. She promised her children would grow up far from that kind of burden, but hardship finds people anywhere. When they brought you to my farm, I saw something familiar in your face. Maybe it was the name. Maybe something deeper. I'm not sure, but I knew this. You weren't someone I needed to oppose. You were simply a man far from home, just like she had once been when she arrived in New York. The radio they took wasn't for anything harmful. It was for families. People trying to reach loved ones separated by borders. Investigators cleared me because they understood I meant no harm, just someone trying to help in the only way I knew. I couldn't help everyone, but I tried. If you're in America now, that means you're free to choose your path. You can hold on to the past and let it weigh you down. Or you can do what my grandmother did, start something new, build, grow, share kindness where you can. There's a Keller family Bible at my home in Nebraska. Linda knows where it is. If you go to her, tell her I sent you. And if you find your name in those pages, then you'll know. We've been connected all along. Henry Mueller." Fritz read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Lucas watched quietly, then spoke. "There's more," he said. "My Aunt Linda still lives on the farm. She told me to tell you if you ever came, that you're welcome there any time." Fritz looked up, vision blurred. "Welcome?" Lucas nodded. "She said Henry would have wanted it. Said the farm always had room for one more." Fritz sat in that church for a long time, holding the letter, feeling the weight of years finally lift. The war was over. His country had lost. His father was gone. But somewhere in Nebraska, there was a farmhouse with green shutters, a Bible with his name in it, and a woman who still believed that names meant family, even when the world tried to make them mean something else. 3 months later, Fritz Keller stood in front of that farmhouse. Linda Mueller opened the door, older now, but still strong. Her eyes filled with tears when she saw him. "Friedrich," she whispered, "I came," he said simply. She pulled him into the house, and for the first time since the war began, Fritz felt like he was home. So, what do you think? Could you believe that an American farmer and a German POW might have been family all along? That in the middle of the worst war in history, bread and lemonade were shared across enemy lines? History is full of stories like this, stories that don't fit the neat narratives we're taught. Stories about ordinary people who chose kindness when the world demanded hatred. If this story moved you or made you think differently about World War II, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if your family has stories like this. Names that crossed oceans, histories that tangled in unexpected ways. And if you want more true stories from the war, that history forgot stories about courage, sacrifice, and the humanity that survived even the darkest days, hit that subscribe button and join the WW2 Soldiers Archive family. Because these stories matter. And as long as someone's still listening, the war really does end. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.